Howdy friends, thank you so much for joining us today. We will be going over our current sermon series, Daniel, with our associate pastor, Reverend Lindsey Runyan. She will talk about why we chose Daniel, some important things to take away from it, and what you as a congregation should take home at the end of the series. Let's get started.
My name is Lindsey Runyan. I'm one of the associate pastors here at A&M United Methodist Church, and I am part of the team that helps craft our sermon series.
What are the key themes of your upcoming sermon series on Daniel, and how does this particular passage tie into the broader narrative of the book?
Yeah, I think the book of Daniel revolves a lot around faithfulness, a lot around courage, and God's sovereignty, and God's presence even in uncertain times. I think Daniel is an incredible prophet who continues to teach us, whether in his visions or his everyday life, what it means to have simple acts of courage. What it means to be present where God is, and to know that even in exile or uncertain times or hostile times in Daniel's world and maybe even our world, we know that God's faithfulness is true, and we can count on that.
What was the reason we chose the book of Daniel for this sermon series?
Yeah, I think the reason why we chose Daniel, in particular, kind of coming into the year of 2025, as we haven't done a book series in a while, so we haven't really followed kind of from beginning to end a book, and so really trying to figure out what kind of book of the Bible do we really want to focus on as a community. If someone can't come to a Wednesday night or a Sunday night or any of the activities, what do we really want them to come away with on a Sunday morning, really, when it comes to Scripture? And choosing Daniel was hard because there were a lot of other Bible stories and topics and books that we wanted to study, but I think being a prophetic voice in the Old Testament was something we really wanted to capture. We don't do a lot of kind of Old Testament voices in that sort of way, and I think, again, in exile and in Babylon and such uncertain times and so much happening around the world in Daniel's life, what's going on in our world? What does it look like to stay grounded in God's faithfulness when cultures say something, completely, countercultural to what maybe you believe? How can you stay true to what God is doing in God's faithfulness? When there are so many voices in this world that demand compromise or to think a certain way or do a certain thing, how can we stay true to what God is calling us into? And not in these big flashy moments, but in these kind of small whispers of courage and acts of faith that maybe don't feel bold, but the resilience that God gives us in Scripture and through Jesus and all the Old New Testament Scriptures. How can we see that kind of being played out in the Old Testament as well?
What is the central message or key takeaway you hope people will grasp by the end of the series?
I think a key takeaway I would love for people to grasp in this sermon series on Daniel is God is faithful even in the exile. In Daniel's chaotic life, through all of these, crazy events, God's purpose prevails. God prevails in all. Even amidst all of the uncertainty of Daniel's life, God is there, and I hope people can take that away.
How does the book of Daniel speak to the challenges we face in our current day-to-day lives?
I think what we can learn from the book of Daniel amidst all of our kind of day-to-day struggles is, what does it look like to have courage and trust? And what does it look like to really, amidst life challenges, not just survive, but thrive? To know that God's faithfulness is always there, and to cling on and to hope to what that looks like. For Daniel to live in a foreign land in exile, what does it look like for him to stay true and faithful to his faith and step into kind of the boldness of what that looks like? And how can we kind of do that within our own struggles and uncertainties and, chaos around us, staying true to what God has called us to do?
What do you hope people will learn about God's faithfulness through the lives of Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, and King Nebuchadnezzar?
I think the book of Daniel is a beautiful illustration with tons of people doing some crazy things, whether it's being caught in a fiery furnace or in a lion's den or the halls of power. We see Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in these places where God isn't just present but active. And I hope people can take away that God isn't just present in our lives but active in our lives. I think the same thing with King Nebuchadnezzar. What does it look like to see his journey with God, and to know that no one is beyond redemption or forgiveness, and no one is ever out of reach? And I think it's a beautiful story of, again, that courage and faithfulness and the boldness it takes to step into God's presence.
How do you envision this sermon series impacting our church as a whole, and what changes or challenges do you hope to see in the lives of our congregation members?
I think what I would love for our church to come away with this series and to be challenged and impacted by is to have the boldness of faith, and not in the shouts or demands of life, like not that boldness, but what does it look like to have a boldness of faith that quietly endures, that trusts in God's holy whisper in moments of life rather than in the kind of big flashy moments, but in the everyday life, I think is something I would love for people to get away with. For people to know and understand and take away from the series, and to know that in every season of life, God's faithfulness is there, where we have the boldness to continue to trust.
When the series closes, what final thoughts do you want to leave the congregation with?
I think one, final thought or something I want the congregation to really take away from this series is faithfulness matters. Even when we don't know the outcomes, that God is an active presence in our lives. And as we continue amidst, whatever happens, God is there. And I hope, our congregation takes away that we're part of, God's larger story. And God is at work in some incredible ways, even though we may not see it or know it, that He's moving.
Thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed learning more about our current sermon series, Daniel. To learn the contents of Daniel, join us at 8:30, 9:45, or 11 o'clock on Sunday mornings. Also, follow us on our social medias. Facebook is A&M United Methodist Church, and everything else is Aggie UMC. Have a great day.